Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, I'm sharing some simple and elegant holiday cards that wow. I'm using the Joyful Season Rub-Ons. These are absolutely gorgeous. There are 2 sheets in this package, and each one of those sheets has 4 different images as well as sentiments that go with it. These make card making so easy and the results are fantastic. I'm also using the Greenwich Market Frame 3D embossing folder. This also has some dies that are with it. So I'm going to be creating 2 shaped cards with this die and embossing folder. I'm also going to be using the Ornate molded frame with one of the cards just for a little bit of a different background, and that will be on a traditional A2 card base. Before I start, I'm going to put the rub-ons onto some Hammermill cardstock. I'm just using my shears in order to cut them away from the sheets. Make sure you leave that backing on them until you're ready to use them, because they will stick to different surfaces if you don't leave the backing on them. So I'm doing 3 cards in this video. So I'm cutting out 3 images as well as 3 sentiments. Now you can do the sentiments and the images together, or you can do them apart. The 2 of them I will do with the sentiments together just because the sentiment I wanted with that image happened to be right below it. And then one of them, the sentiment, will be separate simply because it wasn't with that image. Now the good thing about doing them separate is you can make the sentiment closer to the image if you want, or you could leave them in the spacing that they are on the sheet. Now once we're ready to do our rub-ons, I take the backing off, put them onto the Hammermill cardstock. These pieces are 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch. I always make sure they're a little bit bigger than what I actually need. I hold down that rub-on and use the little popsicle stick that comes with them and rub them on completely. When I'm peeling that release sheet off of there, I make sure to hold it down so that if by chance there's an area that doesn't rub off, I can easily just let it go. It will go right where it's supposed to be. It makes it easier than trying to piece it in place. This way you can get a complete image. So I'll start from the top and then work my way to the bottom, or to the bottom to the top. It really doesn't matter. But the main thing is when you're taking that sheet off, lift it up, see if there's any of that peel off left on that sheet. And if there is, just put it right back down and rub that area. They're super easy and they come off really easily. So you want to make sure that you don't take that backing off and put it somewhere, because like I said, it will start to stick and then you'll lose some of your image. And when you put it down on that cardstock, make sure you have it exactly where you want it first before you completely let it go. So these are super easy to use. I've used rub-ons in videos before from Spellbinders. The images are absolutely gorgeous, and you could do this Greenwich Market Frame 3D embossing folder with the die set with those images as well. That frame itself, I don't think only needs to be used for holiday cards. They make fabulous holiday cards and I think they're absolutely beautiful, but you can use them with other things throughout the year as well. So once I had my image for this one done, I went and put the sentiment on, and I put the sentiment for this one a little bit closer than the ones where the sentiment were already on the sheet. Now that the images are on the Hammermill cardstock, I'm going to take the inner rectangle frame and I'm going to die cut 2 of these images. Now originally what my plan was to use the frame for one of the images and then to use the embossing folder and emboss the second one, or use the larger frame. But that larger frame for the frame itself is just slightly bigger than the 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches. Now, to be honest, I didn't spend a lot of time measuring it. It could maybe be able to fit in there exactly, but because it was that close, you can't really customize exactly where the center for that peel off ends up being. So I opted to change my plan for it. So I take the image that I wanted to use the Ornate molded frame with, and I center the image in that frame. Once it's embossed, I plan on using my trimmer to trim it down, so it doesn't need to be centered with the cardstock. I want to make sure that the image itself is centered within the frame and that I don't accidentally emboss a little bit of that sentiment on the bottom. So I line that up, use my die cutting machine with the stacking for 3D embossing folders, and that will be the same stacking for both the Ornate molded frame as well as the Greenwich Market Frame embossing folder. Now for the pieces where I die cut with that inner rectangle die, I do tape that die down in place with a little bit of Best Ever craft tape just to make sure it's not going to shift and move on me. This has a little bit of the image going outside of that rectangle, but that is absolutely okay. This is going to fit in the center of the frame once we're completely done. So off screen, I die cut 4 of the frames. I did 2 of them out of some classic white cardstock, 1 of them out of Fern Cardstock, and 1 out of Cranberry Cardstock. Then I am lining up my Cranberry one as well as my Fern one in that 3D embossing folder. The shape lines up really easily. There's just a tiny little border that goes outside of that embossed frame, so it's really easy to line that up. And again, we're using the stacking for 3D embossing folders in our die cutting machine. This frame itself, I think, just makes a really beautiful shaped card. So the back of the card I'm doing in white, so it makes it really easy to write your sentiment on the back. I am scoring at the 5-inch mark from the top, and then I'm folding nicely along that score line just to make sure that we have a really nice hinge. Now, before I assemble or put my front of my card onto that card base, I am going to use some gold ink to bring out the beautiful accents in that frame. So I'm putting those embossed die cuts on my sticky mat, then I'm just really lightly rubbing that gold pad on top, and you could really use whatever color pad you want, but because these are holiday cards and because of the colors in the images, I thought the gold would look really, really pretty and would bring out some of those accents in the images. Now you can see I got a lot of ink on my mat there, so you definitely want to do it on a surface that is easy to clean. Once we have that ink on there and I've let it dry a little bit, I put a little bit of Barely Art glue on the top of that card above that score line. Then I glued that back to the front. I put my acrylic block on there just to hold everything nice and flat while we're waiting for that to dry. Now, to frame in my image, I took that same gold pad and just rubbed the edges of my rub-on image in that gold ink. Another option would be to say use a gold marker to put that gold around the outside, but we already have that ink pad there, so it's nice and easy to use it again. I glued that in the center of the frame, let that dry for a few moments, and then just to add just a touch of texture to my image, I put some dots of Stickles on the berries in the greenery in that image so that it has a little bit of extra texture as well as sparkle. Now, the Stickles that I used don't have any color to it, so you're going to still see the image underneath it, but again, it's just going to add that extra little bit of texture and that extra little bit of sparkle to catch the eye. I'm going to do the same thing with this other image here, rubbing it in that gold pad to make sure that it is framed nicely in the gold. I'm going to assemble the card base, putting the green top onto that white bottom. And when you're adding the 2 pieces together, make sure that you don't have any white from the base peeking out. We want to make sure that the base of the card is nicely hidden behind it. And then again, that acrylic block on there really helps to make sure that everything stays nice and flat so it can glue. Now, you could always use your hands and hold it, but I always like to be busy and be working on something else while things are drying. For this image, I'm going to not only use the Stickles, but I'm also going to use a little bit of glossy accents. First of all, on the ornament hanging from the top of the image, and then a little bit for the sparkles or whatever that is in the background, just to add a different texture to the Stickles. So the Stickles are still going to add that glittery, sparkly texture. The glossy accents is going to add a little bit of glossy dome dimension to those areas, and it just gives it a different finish. The glossy accents, when you first put it down, it has a milky haze to it, but that dries completely clear. We're ready to work on our third image, and this is the one that was embossed with that ornate molded frame. So I'm just using my guillotine trimmer to trim around it. I'm using the lines from that embossed frame in order to trim it down. Now, I'll tell you right now, it is really hard to see those lines while you're trimming, and I do realize as I'm doing it that I'm cutting a little bit, one of the edges, I cut an extra rib or whatever off. So you'll want to be careful with this. Again, it has a really nice result to it, but it's just a little bit more challenging because we have just really light lines with some of the lines that are embossed in there. But I wanted to make sure that I could frame it with a mat. So in the end, it ends up being 3 3/4 inches by 5 inches or close to that once I'm completely done. I used some Cranberry Cardstock for my mat, and I trimmed that to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. I wanted to bring out the edges again just a little bit, just like the other images. So I'm rubbing that in that gold ink pad. And it's a beautiful gold ink pad, so it really frames it in nicely. And it almost gives it a look of a gold mat, a really thin gold mat behind that image. I'm going to glue both of these pieces onto my A2 card base, and I'm using that Barely Art glue. I'm only gluing the outside parts of that frame because the inner parts of the frame are popped out, so that glue wouldn't have any contact with the base of the card anyways. Now in the dies for that embossing folder, there are 2 different leaves as well as a flower that you can emboss, and I had thought that I would add them to this card here towards the bottom, but realized that the flower was just too large and it was going to cover over some of that sentiment. So the option would be to either leave that sentiment alone, have it on a separate piece of cardstock so that it could go over those florals. I opted to leave it off because I really liked the sentiment that was there, and I just didn't really want to complicate that card. But just so you know that those are options to go with your embossed frame if you choose, say, a different image, or if you choose to do your sentiment separately. You'll find everything that I've used listed and linked down in the description box below. I just absolutely love the look of that embossed frame. That is going to look so nice on display because it really frames in that beautiful image. And I've used rub-ons here, but you could use this frame with different stamps or with different die cuts to create cards as well for absolutely gorgeous results. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate all the time that you spend with me. I hope you have a fantastic day.